the Bible is a very complicated book. And if I take it naively, then I am the victim, or I'm being controlled by an editor or someone whose point of view was his point of view.
If I go through the Book of Mormon and I look into the plain and precious things and the way they describe it, when it happened, who the great and abominable church is, in my mind, the plain and precious things are lost a lot in the Old Testament. Always great to sit down and talk with Dave Butler. I love the way he thinks. I think we're very like-minded. We found each other because mutual friends of ours that said, hey, you two guys need to sit down and talk. And so love the discussions that we have. Love to have you guys kind of just eavesdrop in on these conversations on the scriptures and gospel topics. You're going to enjoy this. This episode is brought to you by Go and Do Travel in our Journey of Wisdom cruise in the Mediterranean. This covers 3 continents. We cover the Greek Isles, going to the Isle of Patmos where John received the book of Revelation. We go to Athens, where Paul obviously taught. We go to Turkey, into Istanbul and Ephesus, where Paul obviously wrote the letter for the Ephesians, but also John probably retired in the Ephesus area. Of course, as Latter-day Saints, what does that retiring really mean? And then we go to Egypt, Cairo, the pyramids and the Sphinx, and we go to Memphis, where Abraham walked and Joseph of Egypt walked and Moses walked. And then we take all of their teachings and we contrast them with the philosophies of men today. It's a fabulous trip. Very excited for this. September 2025. Go to CwicMedia.com. Go to trips and events up at the top and scroll down to Journey of Wisdom. Here we go. All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we are talking with Dave Butler. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Greg.
I want to talk about this quite a bit. It is a topic that I often run into problems when I'm talking about the Old Testament with evangelicals, using it as an anchor. How much truth is in the Old Testament? Where do we see problems with this? How did it develop? And is it weak? Is the Old Testament weak?
Yeah. Wow, what a great question. This probably unavoidably flows into other questions that may be sort of deep waters in the sense of what is religion? Because I think arguably the creation of the Old Testament, not even necessarily as we know it, but the work of the Deuteronomic reformers, so prior to Ezra, right? But the process by which the various sort of groups put together their accounts of Israel's history created the idea of a religion of the book. And so, like, some of the question you're asking is, I think, what are the limitations of a religion of the book? And are we a religion of the book? And to the extent we are, is that a problem? So these are exciting questions. That's awesome. Where should we start?
Let's start with the Deuteronomic reforms.
Yeah.
And because that's one place. I mean, we can back up even further. Well, let me start with this. So I was in a discussion with a scholar, Noel B. Reynolds.
Sure.
And so I'm talking with him, and he's doing a lot of work right now on the scribal schools. This is something that, was it Brant Gardner, I think, that first started going into this? But Noel's gone into this quite a bit now and is continuing to do scholarly work on this. And that is the 2 scribal schools that would have existed. Mm-hmm. One would be the scribal school of Joseph, mm-hmm. and the other would be the scribal school of Judah. And something he was covering on this is that what we likely have as an example in the brass plates is a continuation of a scribal school that would have started, or at least a poignant moment of the scribal school's history would be with Joseph of Egypt.
Okay.
You look at Joseph, he was young, but very educated. He gets thrown in as a slave from his brothers. He ends up being sold to the Egyptians, and he thrives. Is this because he's just a special guy?
Yeah.
Or is this because he's been educated at the very, very highest levels? Is he thriving with Potiphar's home because he already speaks Egyptian? Does he already have this kind of scribal background with him, being a Egyptian being kind of a lingua franca of their time?
Sure.
Lingua franca. But if that's the case, what Noel Reynolds would say is that you have then a very strong traditional scribal school coming down to Lehi and Nephi.
Through the tribe of Joseph, through the northern kingdom, presumably.
Through the northern kingdom.
Yeah,
yes.
super interesting.
And then you have a Judahite, and what he would say, and I would have some issues with this, is that the Old Testament then being the Judahite tradition would not have been put together until maybe even the beginnings of the 7th century BC.
Super interesting. From
oral tradition only.
Super interesting. Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. First of all, Noel Reynolds, his niece is my sister-in-law Diana, so we're kind of like weirdly kin. We haven't met. I left a book on his doorstep a few months ago, so hi Noel if you're listening. So that's super interesting. So the suggestion. So first of all, one point here. Let's bring this out and make it explicit because it's easy to forget. The Old Testament as we have it is articulated from the point of view that is the kingdom of Judah, and it's late, and it's urban, and it's scribal.
Okay.
Right. So that's who puts, and it's very easy to forget about who that's really excluding, which is almost everybody. Right.
Yes.
So it doesn't include the points of view of the Northern Kingdom, except in as much as the epic of the Northern Kingdom got copied into Genesis, right? Or their stories about the Northern Kingdom although all of those kings are bad, according to the scribes of the Southern Kingdom. So the chronicler is, so the Deuteronomic, well, this is good. So the chronicler is, that's the Ezra-Nehemiah complex, okay? And the chronicler seems to take the Deuteronomic history and then add bits to it. So the name of Chronicles in the Septuagint is ta paralipomena, which means the things that have been left out. So the chronicler is interesting because we get cool little tidbits, like the chronicler. Book of Chronicles is the one that mentions that David appointed musical prophets who prophesied with the harp. Okay, which is not in Kings or elsewhere, and that probably is showing us the origin of Psalms, right? That probably tells us where the Psalter comes from, that there were musical prophets in the temple. That's not in the work of the Deuteronomists, who were not temple priests. They were scribes. They wrote from outside the temple, right? But I think Chronicles is still nevertheless a late Judahite urban book.
If they're putting things in that were left out, where are they getting them from?
That is an interesting question. But I think the suggestion is that that it's somehow a priestly source or a priest affiliated. A lot of the left-in bits
that was not included in the Deuteronomic reform.
Right. A lot of the left-in bits are temple related. Another example is it's in Chronicles, and I forget the chapter. There's one verse in the Old Testament that refers to the Ark of the Covenant as the chariot. Okay, it is there are lots of indications that it is, right. It's carried out to war. God sits upon it. He sits on or above the cherubim, right. It's his throne. But there's one verse that says it's a Merkava, and that's which is in Chronicles. So it has kind of priestly lore.
Yeah, that's a very temple
lore.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's some kind of a temple family, temple guild. I'm not sure actually more specifically what the theories are around the Ezra-Nehemiah complex. We could look it up.
Okay. So where are we getting? I mean, again, this is also something. If I go through the Book of Mormon, and I look into the plain and precious things that they're talking about, and the way they describe it, when it happens, who the great and abominable church is, in my mind, this is how I've laid it out. Could be totally wrong, but it looks to me like the plain and precious things are lost a lot in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And not And I would say when I say lost, I mean not in there
Yeah.
or changed
Yeah.
as compared to the New Testament,
Yeah.
which is more of a philosophical change to words and understanding that you see there. So what happens with the Deuteronomic reform with the record of the Old Testament? What happens to it there? We have Deuteronomic books. We have some that are not Deuteronomic books. Are those pure?
Yeah. That's interesting. So let's talk about this. So let's talk about now this is all theory, right?
Sure.
This is all theory. Mm-hmm. It is worth saying that that's kind of like saying that the theory of the movement of tectonic plates is theory. Like, that's right. It is a theory, but it's quite foundational to its discipline. Mm-hmm. Okay, so any kind of standard commentary on the Old Testament is going to assume something like what I'm about to say. Okay, so dating back into the 1700s, but picking up speed in the 1800s, scholars started to say, hey, we think that the book of Genesis, for example, or Exodus has multiple sources to it. And the Tetratuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, seems to be from three major sources that were woven together. Mm-hmm. And you've already kind of indicated where some of these are from. One of them seems to be the epic of the northern kingdom, and one of them seems to be the epic of the southern kingdom. Okay? And those are called, you can think of them as Ephraim and Judah, because they call E the epic of the northern kingdom of Ephraim. Actually, they call it that because it's the Elohist source, but you can think of E for Ephraim, works perfectly well. J for Judah, but actually it's the Yahwist source, right? So the E is the north, so the theoretical may not really have existed, right? It's worth mentioning no one's ever found E in its own scroll, right? So this is a theory. So E is the epic theoretically that the northern kingdom told about themselves, their origins, right? J is in theory the epic kingdom the epic that the southern kingdom told about themselves, their origins, and they overlap. They tell sometimes different versions of the same story, or slightly different stories, but that are clearly just echoes of each other. Sort of big showcase example is that, and they use different vocabulary too. This is why they're called the Elohist and the Yahwist. One of the most famous things is that the epic of the northern kingdom. Now, again, this is the theory. This is from a secular scholarly point of view. Tends to refer to God as Elohim, and the southern epic tends to refer to God as Yahweh. Now, I think you can apply that tool way too naively and get to wrong results. But when scholars are looking at a passage in Genesis, a sign that they think that will incline them to think that this came from the northern kingdom is the use of Elohim, right? So a kind of a showcase example is the flood narrative, which if you read it over 3 chapters, you'll find that about half of the story refers to Elohim, and about half refers to Yahweh. And if you pull those two stories out, you'll find that each one is actually a complete story that gives the setup, that talks about the flood, that has different numbers of days, that has different birds. One has doves, one has ravens, okay, that has a different ending talking about the renewing of the covenant, that has different numbers of animals that go in the flood, right? One story is 2 by 2, one is 2 by 2 for the unclean animals, but 7 pairs for the clean animals, right? Those are not compatible. If you read it as one story, it's a story that has contradictions. If you see that it's got 2 stories that someone stuck together at some point, then you go, oh, it makes sense of the contradictions. Okay. Now the question is, why would someone do that? So here's the theory. Here's the guess. You would do this if you had 2 nations that you needed to bring together and include everybody. Okay. So look, we've just finished an election that has big feelings. So let's say that there was like a national epic of Kamala and a national epic of Trump, and you now needed to get everyone on the same page, right? And you might do that by trying to combine those epics. Okay, so that everyone looked at it and recognized that's my epic, that's my story. Now, part of the so when would that be? By the way, well, the idea is that a likely candidate is after the fall of the Northern Kingdom, when a bunch of refugees come south, and so this is a theory. What I'm describing, the documentary hypothesis, is sort of the basic theory in a paradigm. Every scholar may have different judgments here and there about details, right? So someone's going to say, no, I read Professor so-and-so, and he said, yes, that's right.
But there's a general consensus.
I'm trying to describe the consensus.
Yeah.
So this gets to what we were saying earlier. Like, were those documents oral? Were they written? And it sounds like what Brother Reynolds might be saying is that the epic, or at least suggesting as a possibility, is that the Judahite epic, J, was maybe still oral at that point. And so there's a written epic of E that's coming south from the Northern Kingdom, and we have all these refugees, and maybe we have scribes also coming south with the epic and with the refugees, right? And maybe the union happens first in like scribal schools, right? Or around the court of Hezekiah or something. And some combination of scribes from the north and scribes or poets from the south deliberately stitched together this account of Israel and its origins, with the result that the story that everyone, remember, most people are probably not literate, right? But a person hearing this read on some occasion would recognize those are my stories. Now there's some I don't recognize, but that's okay because they came down with the guys from Manasseh, or that's the local guys from Benjamin. That's the story they remember, right? So that's the basic idea of E and J. The third source is called P. P is the priestly source. P knows about the inside of the temple and wants to tell you what happens in the temple and wants to tell you stuff about it. P is also super interested in details. P likes to count. So if you ever get a historical passage that talks about on the third day of the month of Nisan, on this 422 miles, right? That kind of stuff likely comes from
calendar
P.
and calculation.
Yeah, exactly. Accounting. So P knows about the inside of the temple. P doesn't want to say very much about it. It is, it may be, so Menachem Haran in his Temples and Temple Service in Ancient Israel is a classic book about the temple, and it's got a lot of commentary about P, because P talks about the temple and tabernacle. But he says a couple things. One, in the same way that Deuteronomy, which we'll talk about, is probably the charter of the Deuteronomic reform, the reforms in the time of Josiah, he thinks P is the charter of the reforms of Hezekiah. So that's an interesting possibility. That suggests that P is early. And I also tend to think that P is early. P has things like Leviticus, okay, the details about the sacrifice. Okay, the later Deuteronomic guys, they don't know how you do sacrifices, or they don't tell you. All they care about is that you must do it to Yahweh and no one else, and give the meat to the poor. Okay, that's it. So the description of the two goats and the ram and the bull and all a detail like that is priest stuff. So we have P throughout the first four books, Hexateuch, the Hexateuch. So. I think another thing that Haran suggests, this is interesting, there's a debate about the tabernacle and whether the tabernacle, as described in Exodus, existed, or whether P basically took the temple as it really was in their day and imagined it as a tent and stuck it in the book of Exodus. Because there's also something else called the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, which is referred to in Exodus and Numbers, which does not seem to be the same thing as the tabernacle, and it doesn't work quite the same way. Because the tabernacle, you go inside and God is there, and that's how the temple works. But the Ohel Moed, you go to the tent, and it's outside camp, and God comes to the tent from the outside to meet you. And so there's an argument that maybe if we had video camera of all this stuff, went back and looked, what we would see on the Exodus is the Ohel Moed, is a much simpler tent away from the camp where you could go and the danger of God appearing to you wouldn't blast the Israelites, right? But that Hezekiah's priests reimagined it as a temple tent, and partly that's a response to people reading the description of the tent and the tabernacle in the book of Exodus and saying, this is crazy. No one's building this tent and lugging it around. Now, people have done crazy things, so I don't know. Maybe they did, right? But that's P. Now, there's argument about P. There are people who have thought P was late. So Julius Wellhausen, who's sort of he wrote a book called Prolegomena to the history of ancient Israel. Prolegomena means things that must be said first. Okay, so the idea is the claim in the title is before you can talk about Israel's history, you got to talk about this stuff in this book. Well, what is the stuff in this book? Well, it's exactly what we're talking about. It's E, J, P, and D. He did not invent those things, but that book, published 1885 or something like that, won the debate. So to this day, if you're going to argue about this stuff, you inevitably end up quoting Wellhausen and agreeing with him or disagreeing with him. He thought P was late, and various reasons, but the basic reason is he says, look, the P passages seem to describe a situation in which the priests are in charge. That never happened while there were kings. So all of this is the imagination of the priests coming back from the Babylonian exile.
So we're talking Ezra and Nehemiah time?
Yeah, exactly. Or even later, maybe, right? So plenty of people think, including me, that P is early. Menachem Haran is another. He thinks P is time of Hezekiah, right? It's the charter or the reforms of Hezekiah. So these debates exist, right? They're possibilities. Deuteronomy is at the end of comes along at the end of the kingdom of Judah. And the account is that there's two accounts, Chronicles and Kings, slightly different, but fundamentally, in connection with the temple reconstruction, we find a book, the Book of the Law. We realize we are doing everything wrong. We have big national repentance and new covenant making, and then we set about to live the way we were always supposed to, but we forgot. Okay. And I think it's 1805. It's a guy named W.M.L. de Wette, another German, who said, hey, look, the rules in Deuteronomy seem to be the same rule as the rules that the books of Samuel and the books of Kings use to judge everybody. And they're different from the other books. So the hypothesis is that the book of Deuteronomy is sort of the constitution. It's the charter, the rules of these people. By the way, who are they? Well, from the Book of Kings, it seems to be a scribal group. They are scribes and lawyers. Okay, and then it seems to be the case that they edited the history: Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings. Right, that they edited. So that's often called the Deuteronomic history, and so the terminology varies, but all of that together is the D source. Okay, and there's been debate over was that one guy early and one guy late? I think the most likely thing is that it was a scribal school that did its work over time.
Is there, What about the book that is found in
Yeah.
the temple just being a revised Deuteronomic version of Deuteronomy?
Yeah. Meaning, could Deuteronomy have existed before?
Yes, but for one of the 5 books, the Book of Mormon mentions 5 books. Maybe there's a different one, I don't know, but they mention the 5 books. So they have 5 books of Moses.
Right.
Can we just be looking at just like they did with Judges and Samuel and 1st and 2nd Samuel? And
100%.
yeah, so it's
100%.
a revised book that says, oh, look, and they put in their very specific things that are most important to them in that revised version.
And in fact, I think that's probably the likely answer. And,
That's what
and I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Some people have suggested, they've pointed out that, for example, the oldest parts of Isaiah don't mention Moses at all. And some people have suggested, well, maybe Deuteronomy made Moses up. Now, I don't think that's likely. Maybe. I don't think it's likely for a lot of reasons. But like the basic reason is if I'm going to go, hey, here's this new sacred book. It says, do what I say. And it's the prophet you've never heard of, Bob. That's not very persuasive.
No, it's not.
But if I go, and it is a newly discovered book of the guy you already know, Moses, then it has more authority, right? Like the pseudepigraphy has no point unless people know Moses already. So I don't think they made him up. Similarly, for the same reason, I don't think they invented Deuteronomy out of nothing. Another sort of reason I think that is the Book of Mormon disagrees with Deuteronomy about a lot, but there are some points of agreement, and so I suspect that Deuteronomy, that the brass plates had, and the Nephites knew, a version of Deuteronomy that was something of a simpler core.
Yeah.
Now, Jonah in his book has argued that maybe it's a different book entirely, maybe. Okay. But for an example, there's I'm going to get this reference wrong, Deuteronomy 18:15, the promise, I will send you a prophet like Moses, right? Which, I forget where, in the small plate somewhere, Nephi, I think, quotes that, right? So,
Yes, that's right.
yeah. So I think you're exactly right. I think that whether it was actually found in the construction or not, I think Deuteronomy was known and existed in some form, and I think it was elaborated. So, for example, Deuteronomy 13, which says if your family member has a vision, even if it comes true, you should kill him. I think that was probably invented by the guys who wanted to kill their neighbors who were having visions, right?
Like Lehi.
Like Lehi, yes.
Yeah, so if that's the case, it's also an easier argument to say the book before was corrupted.
Yeah.
Right? The book was corrupted before. Now we've got the true version. This was the original.
Yeah. And it's also consistent with the hypothesis of how J&E are handled, right? Is that existing material was taken and reworked so that people would recognize the existing stuff, and that would give authenticity, authority to the things that were new to them, right? What does that leave us with? Well, it leaves us with a book that is, we're not even done, by the way, yet, because later Ezra comes along, and Ezra adds Ezra and Nehemiah, but also the books of Chronicles and other later stuff, right? So, like, to characterize the whole, what we end up with are it is, as the name says, a collection of books. And these are by writers with different perspectives, some of whom were greatly at odds with the other writers, right? And every one of whom is trying to tell a story from their theological and maybe political and maybe historical point of view, right? So it is not objective. Only parts of it even resemble history in the modern sense. And I think the big question here is, well, what do we make of it, right? Like, how do we trust that? What do we do with that?
Well, before we get to that, though, what is P prophetic?
Yeah, interesting question.
I mean, I am used to a Book of Mormon, and even a New Testament, that is written by prophets and apostles, right, and very precisely in the Book of Mormon, detailing every the entire DNA of that record being passed down from Moroni, all the way to Moroni and then to Joseph Smith.
Yeah.
Right? Why would priests, unless they, again, unless there's some kind of prophetic calling there, why would priests be writing and having such a great influence on, which by the way, the priestly stuff is actually probably the most important to me. That's what I want, the temple stuff, right?
Yeah.
But still, are they, is that a prophetic writing?
Yeah. Super interesting. There's a lot written about what it meant to be a prophet in Israel, and including debate, right? So I like the story of Micaiah ben Imlah, which tends to say that a prophet was somebody who got their calling or their commission by entering the presence of God and his counsel, his sod, and then taking his message down to earth.
So a vision.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So,
or the temple.
Or he really went to heaven, right? I don't know.
Okay. An ascension experience.
An ascension experience, something in that space, right? That's what the story of Micaiah ben Imlah tends to suggest. It also says, hey, being a prophet is not necessarily about telling the future. And also, disturbingly, Micaiah starts by telling false prophecies. He comes down and prophesies a lie because he's told to, right? So this is so there's that. We also have descriptions of groups called the sons of the prophets. So sons seems to be, this is true of the musical prophets in the Chronicles too. If you look at the passages where David appoints them, it's so and so and his sons, so and his sons. Well, sons probably it's not probably a family. Probably what it means is like the young men in his musical prophetic guild, right?
It's a hierarchical structure.
It is, and
yeah.
Absolutely, that's going to outlive him, right? So, on the other hand, we also the Urim and Thummim seems to have been used oracularly, and who was it used by? It was used by Aaron. It was used by the high priest, and when he took it and he sha'al b'Yahweh, he inquired of the Lord to ask for. Directions from God in political crises, right? So
is Aaron a seer?
So I'm. It's an interesting question. I'm leery of applying. It's okay if we apply our concepts, right? As long as we know we're doing it. Right, you say, look, well, in our concepts, we would probably say Aaron's a seer. On the other hand, we don't have any of the sort of Joseph Smithian, as far as we know, the production of texts, right? The Urim and Thummim, as it appears in the Old Testament, it's to ask for it's used to ask for advice where to send the army when Israel goes out and comes in, which is the deployment of its men to go fight wars.
Book of Mormon does the same thing.
Book of Mormon does the same thing in at least two passages. That's absolutely true. There are at least two places where military leaders go to ask advice of a priest with a known reputation for having visions, and he inquires of the Lord, and then comes out and says, "Send the armies here." And that is those are two checklists, tick all the boxes. If those were in the Old Testament, a scholar would say, well, the Urim and Thummim is being used here. It's not mentioned, but these are all the indicators that the Urim and Thummim is in use.
Yeah.
So that's a little fun one.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let me back up a little bit more on the DNA of the composition of the of the Old Testament. Then, so if we're going to what is are you saying for you P is the earliest source?
I think P is early. So one of the passages this really matters for is that we have basically two descriptions. Two relatively complete descriptions of the Day of Atonement. One of them is in the Mishnah and Tractate Yoma, so that's 2nd century AD, and the other one's in the book of Leviticus. So the question is, when is that day to? Leviticus 16. Yeah. So Wellhausen would say, this is like 3rd century BC or something. And if that's true, what that means is the Israelites went and the Book of Atonement is, the Day of Atonement is some kind of worship that they learned from Babylon, and it wasn't part of their earlier religion. Okay, and in that case, what you end up is it's very hard not to say this looks like demon worship because we sacrifice a goat to Yahweh, and we sacrifice a goat to something named Azazel, translated as the scapegoat in the King James, and you'll see some commentaries that say this is late and borrowed unknown Babylonian sources. If it's old, like Menachem Haran thinks, or like Jacob Milgram in his commentary in Leviticus, or like me, I think this. I'm nobody, but those guys are big names. Or Richard Elliott Friedman, who wrote the Bible, then instead what you have is you have a theology of atonement that is at least as far back as the kingdom. During the first temple, there is a theology in which the sins of Israel are atoned. However you read that ritual, by blood sacrifice, and I think it is very readable as a goat is designated to be Yahweh. It is sacrificed. The blood of the goat is spread on the temple, which is the model of the world that atones for the sins of the world, right? So when you date P...
And the people.
Yeah, well, yes.
Yeah.
So when you date P determines when you think Israel had a theology of atonement and whether it was early or whether it was late and some kind of import.
It seems to me that... because if you go back to the model that I would say of the temple,
yeah,
you go back to Sinai,
yeah,
and unless they are projecting back into Exodus,
yeah,
which maybe this is P. I don't know. Is P in Exodus?
Yeah, some of it is.
Okay, so Moses goes up and he's going to atone for Israel.
Yeah.
As that to me is part of the whole thing. That is part of the drama. That is part of what would be put into a narrative of a temple.
Yeah,
and would be misplaced unless it's projected back.
Yeah, that's interesting. And these are the kind of debates scholars get into, right? And some will say, "Hey, Sinai is the." Moses on Sinai is really the king being projected back. And so things that Moses does going up on Mount Sinai are the things the king does going up into the temple. And Sinai is...
it's the drama. It's the temple drama. But still, here's my issue that I always get with biblical scholarship is...
Okay. If you only have one, you're doing pretty good.
Yeah. Well, it's so much of it is founded on secularism.
Sure.
Okay, so it's a matter of, well, I can't believe that God showed up and spoke with Moses on Sinai. Therefore, let me make an explanation that says, well, this is based on a cultic ritual for the priests in the temple, and they are using this and putting it back into the books of Moses
100%.
to use it as a liturgical model for what they're doing.
100%. 100%. So in a minute, I'm going to say something gigantically unsecular. But another example, a secular critic cannot say in her volume criticizing whatever book, right? Here clearly Zechariah is foretelling the future. This was fulfilled in the year 200. That ain't going to happen.
No.
So if you want to stay in that guild, the only acceptable thing to do is to make some explanation that involves, hey, this wasn't meant to be a prophecy, and the people later, fudged the way they wrote the event to claim it was a fulfillment, right? Because the secular assumptions are, continuity, no one knows the future, God isn't really doing stuff, right? Having said that, even in a purely secular, let's get to the question. This is the big question, right? Like, what do I do about this? Because I say, look, this is a fundamental. These are the basic paradigm theories of biblical scholarship, right? So if you walk into Harvard Theological Seminary, whatever it's called, and you start talking about, everyone's going to know what these things are, and they're going to have a view on when P is dated, whatever, right? And if you walk into your average congregation, probably of any kind of denomination, and start talking about this stuff, you're going to get reactions ranging from blank stares, right?
Mostly, probably.
To a certain amount of hostility, to a small number of people getting very excited to talk to you.
Yes.
Right? Because it's very difficult to bridge the gap from, hey, this is how I see the Old Testament, to what do I say from the pulpit? Right? Because what you end up with is hey, the Bible is a very complicated book, and if I take it naively, right, then I am, in a sense, the victim, or I'm being controlled by an editor or someone whose point of view was his point of view, right? So how do I deal with that? By the way, we hadn't even talked about the New Testament, which has its own problems, including why do some of the Gospels overlap? And how old are these books? And most scholars would say, actually, the earliest stuff is not the Gospels. We read them first, but probably it was Paul's epistles.
Yes,
right.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, and Paul says, and okay, if we apply the secular assumptions, right? What we have is this guy shows up who used to persecute the church, and he says, I saw Jesus in a magical vision, and then Jesus's biography is written by people listening to him, right? And the guy who was Jesus's brother gets kind of, in the editing, in the book, gets pushed into a corner, right? James is the brother of Jesus, and there are a few other texts, notably the Sermon on the Mount. I think the Jude is one of them, that are very sort of Jamesian, but the New Testament's mostly Paul. So it's late, and it's from this really particular point of view, right? And if you apply totally secular standards, it seems like the wrong point of view, actually, right? So the whole Bible has these, I don't want to say problems, but features, right? So what do we do about it? I think some people would say, maybe some members would say this, some LDS church members. Okay, yeah, it was composed in a rough way, but for whatever reason, okay. And your reason, if you're LDS, might be, hey, the articles in faith say this is the word of God, so that's good enough for me. Or, hey, I've heard this. Joseph revised what needed to be revised, so anything that was not revised in the JST must be accurate.
I think that would be a very common perspective.
I think that's probably a very common perspective, too. I think another perspective you could have would be more like, well, look, there could be like by their fruits shall you know them. The Bible must be good because of the good things it's done in the world, or the good things it's done in my life. And so, however God caused it to be composed, including by people who disagreed with each other or even committed acts of violence against each other, the outcome is, I have this book, and it is the Word of God, and it's meant for me to use in my life, right? So I think that's another perspective you might hear. All of those perspectives tend to go to the point of, well, we'll just kind of use the Bible as is, or we'll use it with the JST. And I have that. I have a guy, and I like him very much, and he regularly emails me to say, why didn't you mention the JST on such and such interview? Hi. And that's great. I respect that, right? Yeah. The answer is because I don't have the JST memorized and I don't go check the notes. I just don't, right? So there's another answer, and here's my.
Can I add one more thing to what you said?
Let's do it.
Another one would be for a Latter-day Saint is Ezekiel 37.
Oh yeah, okay,
right. It's like, okay, I've got the stick of Judah.
Yeah,
it's supposed to be here.
Yeah.
And the stick of Joseph, which again I think is not the Book of Mormon alone. I think it's the breastplates.
There's another way. Okay, so that's awesome because that exactly is the point I was going to make. Here's my deeply unsecular take on all this stuff. Okay, I do think the Bible has composition problems. I think that because Joseph said it. I think that because the Book of Mormon says it. So I think Nephi's vision in First Nephi, what is it, 13 and 14. I think literally he seems to be talking about the New Testament because it's after these things go forth from the mouth of a Jew. And that might even be references to like the James Paul dispute. I don't know. But I think he's also showing us things that happened in his own lifetime because that's, again, we don't know, but we think that it was in his father's life and in his lifetime that the books are being composed and the things that he thought were plain and precious are being omitted and destroyed.
In practice as well.
Yeah, that's right. You can no longer do this. Yeah. So I think that is all difficulties with the Bible. And I think that means that, hey, there's a lot of great stuff there. Mm-hmm. It just has to be used with caution. You got to think about it, right? And that's sort of awful because the Bible's already big. And if you go, listen, you now need to also think about, well, what source is this? Mm-hmm. And what's his point of view, right? It just makes the Bible harder. But we have the Book of Mormon. Mm-hmm. The Book of Mormon's amazing. It is the best book. It is really great. So the Book of Mormon is the time capsule that comes out of the end of the First Temple period, before all that stuff is lost. Okay. Now, it turns out it isn't all lost. It goes underground. And so we know that because some of it kind of comes back up with Jesus, right? There are people who remember that the Lord was king and that the Lord could come in the form of a man and that he was supposed to one day. And that when Jesus came and knew the signs and gave the signs, did the things that were expected, that notwithstanding that they knew he was from the family of this tectone, right? Mm-hmm. That those are the brothers and his mother is still with us. He's a flesh and blood guy. Nevertheless, they're able to say, because they remember something out of the first temple that's been suppressed, they're able to say he's Lord, right? So among, and this is, I think, why you get these sort of mass events reported. Morton Smith wrote a book in which he claimed that Jesus had hypnotic powers, and that he could like mass hypnotize people and turn them all into Christians. And also he was able to give those powers to the early apostles so that they could go around and like mass convert people. But then like the power faded. So that's why you have all these early mass conversions.
The hypnotic apostasy.
That's correct. He also implied that Jesus knew mysteries that included gay sex. So like it's controversial theory to say the least. So another way to think about it is, look, there were a bunch of people in Palestine who remembered this stuff, who were not of the scribal class, right? Who may have been educated, who may not have, right? It's people who remembered what it was like when they had a sacred king who was the Lord in person, right? And that's why you get 5,000 people join in a day, or many priests united to them, right? Is because some, Jesus or one of his apostles or when young Jesus shows up at the temple and Anna and Simeon are there like waiting for him, right? And they recognize him. Well, who are they? Well, there's some pocket of people who remembered something from an older time, right?
Yeah, the old paths, as Jeremiah says. That's why I always refer to that. It's the old paths that Jeremiah talks about. There is a remnant.
Yeah.
I don't see how you get around it. There is a remnant of those that know of the old paths.
Yeah.
I think that's rooted in the temple drama.
Yeah.
That highlighted Christ. It was the crux of everything. Yes. And they are a remnant of the Deuteronomic reforms, as they cast out and no longer suburban or no longer urban, rather.
Yeah.
And they're probably the first converts to John.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so what do we have in the Book of Mormon? We have this fantastic time capsule that says, here's a group of people at the end of the first temple, and they are taking the stuff out of the first temple that is being suppressed. They're being attacked, and the hierarchy, the Jews who are at Jerusalem, the royal tribe in the capital city, okay, people that have the soldiers and the priests on their side, are trying to kill Lehi. Why? Well, because he's preaching about a Messiah, because he's preaching about a son of God who will come, right? This is someone, an anointed one who will come among us in a person. They want to kill him. So they take this and all of their lore about Eden and the tree of life and the stuff that's precious to them, and they run, and we get their record, right? And that's it's not just the link between the Old Testament and the New Testament, right? It's the thing that shows us what the Old Testament and the New Testament both were supposed to be before they were edited or assembled in the sort of strange ways. It really, so look, if the church came to its senses and did away with committees and put me in charge of Sunday school, okay, every year would be Book of Mormon year, and then we'd rotate the other ones. This is Book of Mormon and Old Testament year. Now it's Book of Mormon, New Testament, Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants. Because the Book of Mormon shows you, now, D's a point of view, P's a point of view, J and E are points of view, right? The Ezra-Nehemiah complex is a point of view. The Nephites are a point of view, right? So I guess on some level I still make kind of naturalistic assumptions because I don't assume that Nephi knew everything. But what I do think, the way that the book was produced, okay, means that it was supernatural. Joseph didn't find it and translate it. Joseph didn't make it up. So either Satan gave him this book or God did. And I think the fruits of the book tell me that God did. And to me, that's the seal where I say, okay, the Nephite point of view, just like anybody else's, is fallible. The Nephites don't know everything, right? But this is a point of view that I think God wants us to have. And it's a point of view that really unlocks the Old Testament. It shows us that the people knew this stuff, but it became forbidden knowledge. It became renegade knowledge. And also it tells us, I think it tells us interesting things about the New Testament. I think it's super interesting. I mean, at the risk of going off down a dirt road, there's only a handful of New Testament names that appear in the Book of Mormon, okay? Jesus, Mary, John, right? That's it. And these are names that either appear in visions or we're told they're communicated by an angel. It's super interesting, right? That sort of suggests to me that look, maybe those names were part of the esoteric inheritance of the Nephites, and Nephi at one point realizes the significance of the name Mariam that he is bringing with him, right? It's like, I can't remember if Nephi or is Benjamin it might be Benjamin who first brings up the name Mary, right? And he says, an angel, which is to say a temple priest, told me this last night, right? And he realizes, oh, this is coming. The timing is we're close. And the significance of this temple name that I have known is Mariam. That is the mother. That's what she's going to do, right? So I think the Book of Mormon gives us keys, and that's a guess. I could be wrong, right? I can be wrong about everything, Greg. I'm just guessing. But it gives us keys for understanding the Old Testament better and understanding the New Testament better. And I think as a moral matter, the manner of its production tells me they may not be all the moral rules I want, okay? But these seem to be, this is a book that God wants me to have, right? So I feel comfortable relying on it morally in ways where the Bible, I sometimes wonder, a lot of apparently innocent people get killed in the Bible, right? Do we really think that that God endorsed all those deaths.
Yeah, because you look at you say, well, it was different in the Old Testament. Well, of course, we've got Old Testament period. It's happening in the majority of the Book of Mormon, and we don't see that at all.
Right.
It doesn't exist. So why is he telling one side to act one way and on the other side of the world to act this way?
Yeah. There's a fantastic, I love this. There's 3 passages, and I might have shared this with you before, but well, I did at the Book of Mormon Evidences event back in March, but the Book of Kings twice articulates a theory of political science. 2 Kings 18, 4 and 5, the people are doing religion wrong. They are sinning. Mm-hmm. And Hezekiah is king. And so he fixes the problem by smashing up all of the stuff people are using to sin. Mm-hmm. And verse 5 says, for this he was the greatest king of Judah ever. There was none before him and none after who were greater. Okay. So that's the political science theory. If you're a king and people are doing religion wrong, you should smash up their stuff. Now, this is exactly what Josiah does in 2 Kings 23. So people are doing religion wrong. So he smashes up their stuff, and he also kills some of them. We get a more thorough description of what he does, and we get almost verbatim the description of how good a king he was. There was none before him and there were none after who were his equal, his greatest king. And I think one of those is echoing the other, or there's a deliberate echo of each other, right? Well, in Alma 13, I think it's Alma preaching, and he talks about Melchizedek. Mm-hmm. And he talks about the people during the reign of Melchizedek, the people are sinning. I think it says they're idolatrous or something. And if you're going to apply the political science theory of the Book of Kings, what should happen is Melchizedek should ride out and kill everybody.
Interesting.
And smash up their stuff. Mm-hmm. Instead, what it says, I want to say it's verse 17 and 18, is it says that he preached repentance. And the people did repent, and he founded peace. And then it says, therefore, there was none greater before him, and there were none greater after. Mm-hmm. And I think that tells us that Alma, or possibly this is the Hand of Mormon, and you never can be 100% sure. Yes. Is aware of the histories written down in the Book of Kings, that some of that came with the Nephites. Mm-hmm. And he's commenting on it. Mm-hmm. And he's saying, no, the act of a righteous king is not to kill people when they sin. Mm. The act of a righteous king is to preach repentance to the sinners.
Interesting.
So not only does the Book of Mormon exist as a sort of historical tool, but it exists, I am comfortable that the moral rules in it. There's still hard cases, right? Nephi cuts the head off a sleeping guy. There's hard cases in there to think about and talk about. But I'm more comfortable with it morally than I am with the Bible, which I think sometimes has some serious, you read it and go, really?
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think that, the way we would look at it is the Book of Mormon is the cipher to the Bible.
Yeah.
Right. It is going to inform you on what should be in there and the way it should be spoken of.
Yeah,
I think. Now, I will say on the Book of Mormon, it being a supernatural book, I think that is all true. However, I cannot separate the brass plates from the Book of Mormon.
Okay, let's talk about brass plates. Awesome.
Right? I just don't see how you can. I think that they are using this immensely in their instruction, in their preaching.
Yeah, they quote out of it.
They quote out of it, and it is so driven into them as to who they are. They have prophecies in there that they already know about, especially being the remnant of Joseph and their identity as a people. I think they may have a much clearer. It's interesting to go back and look at the JST and where it is changed. Mm-hmm. Where there is the most amount of change, where you find this. And you find this with Joseph, and you find it with Abraham. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, in my mind, is there a peek into the brass plates?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
When you read that, and because the Abrahamic covenant, the identity and DNA of Joseph, down through the people of the Book of Mormon, those are informers to who they are and their relationship with God.
Yeah.
Right. It's not just I'm a prophet and I'm downloading everything.
Right.
It is a complete legacy of history and scripture.
Yeah.
That is informing the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
Right.
It's there's so many interesting things to say here. So
why wouldn't they just bury the brass plates with the golden plates?
Oh, maybe they did.
Yeah, maybe they did. I don't know. I mean, was it in the stone box though? I don't think it was explained. Maybe I don't think it was in the stone box.
Well, we have the prophecy that they'll I don't know if the language has come forth, but they'll shine on undimmed or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So, first of all, why do I not always quote the JST besides my personal failure, which is part of the explanation? I don't always know what the JST is. So I suspect it is not a restoration of a lost original. The reason I suspect that is because it doesn't read like it. It doesn't read like Hebrew or Greek text. It reads like now a guy is inserting new parts. So it feels to me like what it probably is look, Joseph is authorized to do this. And he's trying to make he's not interested in the Bible as a museum piece. He's interested in the Bible as a tool to help you get salvation. And so he's reworking the Bible to make it a tool that will help you achieve your salvation. So that's what I think the JST is, right?
I agree with that.
It is super interesting that we get into sort of Jonah Barnesy space here. It is super interesting that there's so much expansion of Abraham and Enoch and Melchizedek, because when all of the books that looked like the Bible but weren't in the Bible started coming out, which mostly happened after the Book of Mormon, right? We had a few before. There's a flood afterward. They don't emphasize necessarily the same people. And it turns out that Enoch and Abraham and Melchizedek are some of the ones who get a whole lot more. I mean, especially Enoch, who gets nothing in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Right? It's very mysterious. I don't know what this means. He walks with God. His age seems to imply he's solar or something. I don't know. Right? That's it. But then there's libraries of books that are written about Enoch, right? So why is it that Joseph was interested in them and produced narratives about them? And then we got all these other narratives. And this is part of Jonah's thesis, is that it has to do exactly with the brass plates. In other words, that if we had the brass plates, we would know more about Abraham and Melchizedek and Enoch because they were on there and they were edited out. Or edited out may be the wrong way to think about it in terms of like the timeline, right? The brass plates are a record held by Laban in his treasury. Not clear why it's him, not clear why it's in the treasury, right? But he may not have been a scribe at all. He may have been not at all associated with the guys who were reforming the history. He may have been just a wealthy family member of Lehi's who happened to have this family heirloom with this fantastic history, right? Which the Nephites went and grabbed. But Jonah's argument is that, and by the way, I believe I can say this. I think he's working on more books, and I think he's going to talk about the relationship between the Apocrypha and the JST and the brass plates in one of his forthcoming books. So, so his thesis is, look, all of these books came forth and they talk about Melchizedek and they talk about Enoch and what they have in common with the stuff that Joseph Smith produces, they have in common because it's from the brass plates. right?
Yes.
So it may absolutely, I don't know if Jonah thinks this specifically. He may watch this and comment at some point. It may very well be that some of what is restored in the JST is in some way from the brass plates directly or indirectly, right? This is what God wanted.
It seems natural to me that would be the case. Why is he putting that portion in there? I mean, a lot of it does have to do with the new and everlasting covenant, but you've got so much about, what is it? Genesis 38, I think it's, just so much about Joseph.
Yeah.
And the blessings and covenants that are made from Jacob to he and his sons, and then going back to Abraham. And it's and of course we get the same thing in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
Right. Not as much about Abraham, but you're getting so much about Joseph.
A bunch of expansing.
That is not a part of the Old Testament at all.
Yep.
And so if there is a something that needs to be restored in some way, because that's really what the JST is. It may not be restoring an original Old Testament text.
Right.
But it's certainly restoring, I would imagine, something that had been understood or delivered before. Why would Joseph Smith be the one talking about covenants made to Joseph and Ephraim? And that's the first time this has ever been mentioned?
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
The Nephites know who they are. They are bathed in this covenant of being Josephites.
Yeah.
Seems to me like it would be in the brass plates.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So that might be exactly it. One of the things Jonah argues, is that the prophecy that the brass plates will never be dimmed, or whatever it says, is a reference to the coming forth of the apocryphal works.
Interesting.
Yeah, which it's interesting, and then and we fall again into an enormous challenge, right? Because it's not like there are 3 of those; there are thousands of them, right? And some of them are like little tiny fragments, and some of them are huge books, and like. Maybe this is one of the works of the millennium, is going to be sorting through that and restoring, because the brass plate, whatever they were, one man could carry them, right? Mm-hmm. So they're not that big. So if that is how they're to restore to us, then there is some kind of a sifting or editorial work that has to happen to figure out what was brass plates, what was not.
Yeah. I'm going to emphasize something I've said before, that is that just as the JST may not be a rewriting or insertion of an original Old Testament text, the brass plates are not an original of the Old Testament. I think that these are very different traditions, very different. You would have some of the same books, but a different scribal school, a different record, a different DNA that is probably prophet by prophet by prophet, or scribe or record keeper, whatever it is, all the way through being guided by the Spirit in some type of prophetic form, not just to Joseph, but probably to Jacob and Isaac and to Abraham.
Yeah.
Case.
Yeah.
Where if Joseph is part of a scribal school, Joseph of Egypt, where is he getting his learning from? Where's that learning coming from? Who are those that are the leaders of his time, and the spiritual leaders that would have been there, and the legacy that would have been there? It's got to be all Abraham.
Yeah.
Doesn't it?
Or it's
did Abraham have no records that he had from before? Did he leave no record besides even what we might see in the Book of Abraham?
Well, so maybe right, maybe Abraham stuff. Maybe Abraham books we don't know about. Man, there's a big Egyptian component to the stuff that Joseph translated, right? And maybe ultimately what we find out is that the scribal school of which Joseph was a member, where he was trained, was fundamentally Egyptian.
I think it was. I don't think there's any question. Right. I think that it was founded in Egyptian.
Yeah.
Why are they writing why are the brass plates written in Egyptian?
Yeah.
It's not. Why is the Book of Mormon written in Egyptian? It's their scribal school.
Sure.
That's what they know.
Sure.
It doesn't make any sense to me that they're not going to write in a way. I mean, it goes to the point of, who is it, Mormon or Moroni talking about the weakness of their writing.
Yeah.
Well, because they want to write in Hebrew.
Yeah.
Or whatever the Reformed Hebrew would be at that time, 1,000 years later. But that's not their. It's not their thing. It's not what they're trained in.
Well, so this gets us maybe around to the point I was making at the very beginning, which is, let me re-articulate it. Should we, after all, not be a religion of the book? Or is the religion of the book something like a preparatory phase to get us to be something else?
The book is the Bible?
Or just books generally.
Okay.
Right? I think there's an interesting... I think there is... Well, so this is an oblique way to talk about it. For some reason, a lot of people have wanted to talk to me about Eve's... This happened over September and October. Several different people wanted to talk to me about Eve's decision to eat the fruit, right? People on Twitter, people email me, want to have live conversations, and everyone has different readings on how conscious was she of the consequences, how righteous, in what sense was the decision the right one, right? And these are all Mormons, and they range from some people who said, well, look, it's good things happened as a result, but it would have been better if she hadn't. To people who said, no, she was supposed to from the first place, right? And other flavors in between. Now, I don't know the answer, right? I don't know the answer. I think there may be a sense in which we expect there to be a right answer because we have a religion of the book. And we expect that if we were looking at the right book, it would tell us, and it would say, hey, it would be better if Eve had not done this, but given that she did, Adam made the right decision, and that's what it means Adam fell that men might be, right? Here's another possibility. So Hans Dieter Betz, in his commentary on the Sermon on the Mount, says the Sermon on the Mount is a religious epitome. What does he mean by that? He means it's a special kind of educational document. So a philosophical epitome. He's sort of a Hellenistic scholar. He's done stuff on like magical writings of ancient Egypt and other philosophers and drama, right? So this is the direction he's coming at it from. So when a Hellenistic philosopher prepares an epitome, it's a kind of a special condensation of the philosophical system of the teacher. And you're supposed to meditate over the epitome and internalize it, not so that you can say it back, but so that once it's fully internalized, having that within you will give you the power to philosophize accurately. You will then be able to produce philosophy yourself.
That's what happens in the visions.
So I think one reason why we might find sometimes inconsistent or potentially inconsistent, or we kind of feel like we have to reconcile them, descriptions of Eden, for example, right, is that people like Lehi aren't really reading their account of Eden out of a book. They're really experiencing it in a vision and a liturgy. And then when they go to talk about it, they're not quoting a book. They have imbibed the liturgy, the ascent experiences in them, and they are, you wouldn't say philosophizing, they're religioning out of it, right? But which is a lower level, in a sense, right? You can't describe that which you've consumed.
what you've experienced.
Putting it into speech is already reducing
you're already reducing it down.
Right. Yeah. And when you write it down, it's a sort of a perversion, because you're sort of killing the thing and fixing it into words, right? When actually it was, I had the experience, it is in me, and to encourage my sons, I'm going to articulate some things this way. And so maybe, right, this is a Dave maybe. Maybe we're not supposed to ultimately be a religion of the book. Maybe that's a kind of a launching pad. And books are great. I love books. I have thousands of books, right? Maybe that's a kind of a launching pad where we are supposed to become people of the ascent, people of the grip. That is the thing we are, right? Or the thing that we're supposed to be learning how to be. And when we've all internalized that, then we can articulate our own scripture, right? That's the spirit of prophecy, is the witness of Jesus, having seen the Lord in his temple, having met with the Lord. I am in balance, I am true, I am whatever, right? That allows me to talk about Eden in a way that will give truth and light and guidance to other people. And at which point maybe the books are all superfluous.
That's very interesting. Yeah, and again, the visions that they're consuming the book, it becomes a part of them. It's very similar to the tree of life in Lehi's vision, where they're consuming the fruit to make it a part of them, or even a sacrament, where we're taking on the name of Christ and partaking of him. Right, his blood and his flesh. Not reading about him,
being filled with righteousness.
That's really interesting.
I don't know. I have no authority. Or PhDs. That's just the thing I think.
That's cool. Well, thanks for thinking with us, Dave. Really appreciate it. This is a very good discussion. And I'm sure we'll have many, many more. I love this discussion about the brass plates in the Old Testament, the Book of Mormon, the New Testament, everything that gets pulled in with this. I think it's important also for members to understand that, as we talked about, there are different reactions on the spectrum for Latter-day Saints, and looking at all of these things, it's like, you can't say that this isn't real or true or written. It's not supposed to be written. Look, I mean, take it for what it is. You don't, then don't. It's up to you, right? It's take it how you want to take it. But I still think you need to learn. You need to be aware of all of these things. And there's a lot of truth to be found in error, I think, right? There's a lot of truth that you can find in error. And as Nephi says, there are errors, there are planet.
There are mistakes of men.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Greg.